Rick Longinati.
Sarah Manser.
Peter Beckman. Bill? Me. Sid Slater. And Charlie Gibbons.
Erica's back there.
Eric in the back.
Need a microphone.
All right, we can be less obsessive about the microphones today because we're not trying to get people in from Italy. We just gave that up. But the good news is we figured out the problem, and the next time somebody's traveling, if they're crazy enough to want to join, I think we can make it work without the harassment. You do still need to use the microphones. So one other point while Nicholas gets his list all tidied up, there's a glossary on the back. Members of the public and of the committee are welcome to start adding to that. You're going to need one. So scribble away.
Okay, thank you. So roll call's over. First thing is, actually, let's do the agenda and then we'll do public comment. So the agenda today starts with public comment. It was pointed out that Mike's report yesterday, which was to be what happened when he reported to the council and community correspondence. Mike, we're just talking about you. I'm glad you're here. The report that Mike gave us at the beginning of the meeting yesterday was about your report to the council and also correspondence between the community and the committee. And what we realized was that the part about the correspondence didn't get discussed. And we want at least to touch on it. So we'll do that first, if that's okay. And then we'll go into the item that we postponed from yesterday and moved it forwards to today, which is the presenters and subcontractors. Then scenarios, this is quite a big piece. Outreach, strategies and alternatives convention. This used to be called Alts exhibit or Alts Fair. Then agendas for July and August, and then oral communication at the end. So oral communication is the part where members of the public can discuss anything that's related to the work of the committee, and public comment is where the members of the public are going to discuss what's on the agenda today. Any questions about the agenda? Then let's go into public comment. Public comment, you need to come forward and find a microphone if you want to make a comment. So this is where you're going to discuss the items on the agenda today.
This is where we discuss items on the agenda.
Yeah.
What if it's
Not on the agenda, then it comes up in oral communication at the end.
So my coming here to ask about a meeting in Live Oak, I have to wait 4 hours to do that?
Well, normally you do it at the end. I mean, the committee can agree to an exception.
Well, why don't you just tell her what the plan is for the meeting in Live Oak? And then
It's not, the plan is that there's going to be one. We don't know when yet, and we'll do it as soon as we can. I'll talk to you afterwards.
Would the committee entertain me asking about this now with what I found out?
You know, we have people who do the scheduling, and we have people who do the scheduling. They work on the scheduling. I appreciate you looking into this, but and I'm glad that you brought it to our attention. I don't think we really want to do that now. It's off schedule, you know.
Are you willing to ask your committee how they feel about it?
Sure. Would you like to make an exception to the agenda?
Sure.
Would anybody object to making an exception to the agenda? Then you can go ahead.
Thank you.
Find a microphone.
Can you all hear me without using the
No,
I'm sorry. Thank you very much for your flexibility. I thought I had, committee, I thought I had this right, that I do it at the beginning. I'm a resident of Live Oak, and we are tens of thousands of the water customers, not just 5,000. We're talking, I think, 39,000. So people in Live Oak have a great deal in stake in what this committee does. And We were told initially that there would be one meeting sometime after the first of the year, and that didn't seem quite right. And so I'm here today to ask you to consider 2 meetings for Live Oak out of, you're going to be having 15 or 20 meetings?
12 meetings.
12 meetings. So maybe 2 of those 12 might be given Live Oakers a chance. I live in the western part of Live Oak. There are many residents who live even farther east, and so that's why I'm here. I did check with the Grange. Nicholas was kind enough to correspond with me by email. He said that the chairs were not comfortable enough for you at the Grange, even though it's a room this big with all of the amenities and there are cushions for the chair, but he said that you would probably not be comfortable sitting on cushions on metal chairs for 4 hours. The Live Oak Grange has all the amenities that are here. So then I went to Simkin Swim Center, and if any of you have been at Simkin Swim Center, you'll know that basically you can get the same thing here, and the chairs are exactly like this. Nicholas did suggest that the room, and there are rooms available for Thursday, Friday, 5 to 9, 2 to 6. And I just asked her to pick 2 dates, and she said, well, there's one in August, 2 in August, 2 in October, and I said, stop looking. I know that there are those available. However, Nicholas, before the meeting, suggested that the larger room was not available and that it was needed. But I know the room that fits 40 to 90 would be just fine for what we're seeing here. You might have to get the visitors' chairs just a little bit more together.
The location of the meeting was not our issue, just so you're clear. You're beating down the wrong path here.
The location of the meeting is not,
Where we meet
the
in
committee
Live Oak is
cannot.
not the problem that we had. So I'm just trying to tell you that going off in that direction is not productive at this point. It's a question of whether we want to meet in different places versus one place.
yes, okay, so what is appropriate for me to say that 39,000 Live Oak customers would feel like stepchildren because this committee cannot find one meeting before the end of the year and is not willing to meet at least twice to make it a little easier on Live Oak residents to be here.
So
Thank
you very much.
Thank you.
3 minutes left for anybody else who wants to. Just stick it in the stand, please. Thank you. Any other public comment? Any other public comment? We've got 2 or 3 minutes left. Okay, let's go on.
Nicholas, would you mind just responding? It sounds like there is availability at Simpkins.
I actually talked with a lady before the meeting and explained that there is availability at Simpkins according to her, according to the criteria that I gave to the city and asked them to look into it. There isn't availability at Simpkins of the type that she's describing. So I suspect that because we have setup time and clear up time, you know, she's simply specifying the time of the agenda, whereas we need an hour before and an hour after at least. And I suspect that that's the reason that either that or she's asking Simpkins Center for the 45-person room. We need the 90-person room. But I can't. I mean, I'm guessing. I don't know. But I was at the Simpkins Center this morning. You know, we're looking into this. It's all going. Don't worry about it. We're taking care of it. So thank you. Mike, we're sort of dropping this on you. But would you like to bring us up to date with the correspondence that you had, the community had with the committee?
Yes. When I volunteered to handle correspondence, and I've now given myself the title of corresponding secretary because I don't know what else to sign at the end of these letters back to people. So people should correct me if I'm not or something, or if that, I write acting corresponding secretary. My plan and what I've done for this meeting for the first time is to respond to every piece of mail or email or communication that we get from people. I don't know how we would get a phone call, but anything that comes in a written form, email or U.S. Post. And to respond to the person and then determine what's the most appropriate response, which is whether it's best to copy the entire committee with it, which will be the case for, if they're trying to give us advice about what to do, that will typically be where it'll go. And you'll get both the person's comment and my response to them, so you'll see how I responded. People may ask questions to which there are factual answers, in which case I probably still, I would give them that factual answer and share it with the committee that they asked, and I gave them that answer back. I'm reserving a category for people that are asking the wrong group or something. They should be talking to the water department or to somebody else, in which case I would write back to them, and then I would just share that happened. So basically, you're going to be aware of all of the correspondence that we get of one form or another and how it got responded to. If the person's asking us a question that requires us to take action, that would be my response. I can't answer that for you. I'm going to submit this to the committee, and the committee will have to determine how to respond to your concern or your issue or something. So as far as I can be clear about it, there'll be total transparency about this. You'll be informed of anybody that's trying to contact us. They'll get a fairly quick response, probably certainly within a day or two, in most cases, about what's going on. We need, as a committee, if we want to do something more, if we want to archive these questions and responses on our website, we can do that. I'm not, even if we use people who use our, which we're setting up on the website, they can send us an email. I will be the person that will be looking down that list of emails that come in, getting back to them, so they're not just left with what happened to my comment. They'll hear back from us about what's going to happen with their comment. And I'm going to work very hard to not be in any way, I'll use the word partisan, or have any particular point of view about these issues, other than informing them about what we're up to, what the committee's doing, and so forth. If it requires a judgment of some kind, I'll be bringing it to the committee for action. I'm not going to be making those judgments on any of these requests. So I'm basically playing a kind of a communication role of making sure that everybody who wants to contact us, that they hear that you hear their concerns, and that they hear back from us quickly that that's going to be the case, rather than, what happened to my comment.
Thank you, Mike. I wonder if anybody has any questions about it, because a lot of correspondence, not a lot, but the correspondence that there was forwarded to all of you. Did anybody not get it? I mean, is this working okay?
And there's been no correspondence so far that you haven't seen. I've sent everything that I got. You either saw stuff in our first month that came directly to us at the meeting, and I didn't send that back out to you, but you've already seen it because it was people gave you a hard copy of something, or gave us a hard copy at a couple meetings, yeah. And I assume that's already been archived by our staff in some way, or our consultants in some way, our staff. But from now on, I will also be keeping a file, and then I'll work with the website committee to figure out whether the best place to keep that's on our website, so the public can see who's written to us and what they've been interested in. So far, you will certainly be aware of it. If we're going to do more in terms of that, we'll have to work that out as a committee. And I would probably do that with a recommendation through the committee that's setting up the website, rather than just bring it directly to you. So we'll save some time. Just have a recommendation on how to resolve those kinds of issues, where it's going to be stored or who can get access to it.
Does anybody have any, thank you, Mike. Does anybody have any comments about or questions about the correspondence that you received? Sid?
I have a question. Question, and it's with regards to the correspondence that I saw that came through from Rick that was forwarded. And my impression or understanding was that the first several meetings, or the first meeting, we committee members wouldn't be, and I know Rick was responding to an individual, but that we wouldn't be advocating our positions or certain positions at this point, and we wouldn't be, politicking in the background, so to speak. And maybe I'm the only one that feels this way, and if I am, I'm crazy. That's fine. But it kind of felt that that's what was happening there. I mean, I saw graphs and charts come through that not knowing where they came from, and it felt that way to me. So, if I'm off base, tell me. But that's what I thought, and it didn't seem appropriate.
Thank you, Sid. Any other comments? Rick?
Yeah. Well. Okay. Yeah, it's hard for me to know what what's presenting information and what's advocacy. We got a lot of information yesterday, and I thought that the materials that I put out would be helpful to people because they're evaluating, how do we calculate demand? How do we look at our supply? And I know we'll get into that as time goes on, but I thought, why not start at the beginning with just, putting out what are the issues here, I guess I'd like to hear more about if you think it had consequences on our group that is undesirable, because I felt it was positive, so I'd be interested to learn more.
So, David, go ahead.
I had actually two concerns about the correspondence that went back and forth. One, which you cleaned up, was making sure that
Everybody you have to get right on these mics.
Okay. One which you cleaned up appropriately was that you had to be clear about the fact that you were not speaking for the committee, but which you did, which I appreciated. The other thing, which to me was, in a sense, losing sight of the committee's work, is that we are trying to engage in a scientific inquiry about things related to the water problem. And part of that scientific inquiry is the impacts of an insufficient supply on our economy, on our local economy. And frankly, I think it's presumptuous for any of us as an individual, and that includes Bill Teisling, by the way, any individual in the community, to think that anecdotally is the way that we're going to define economic impacts when we have engaged Stratus Consulting that is in the business of doing economic analysis, including economic analysis of insufficient water supply. And one of the tasks that very much needs to be done from a scientific perspective is actually to do an analysis of that we might consider as part of the whole package. So, I think it's fine if you want to advocate your position as long as you're clear that you're advocating your position. But in terms of us functioning as a team that's going to make an inquiry into the different facets of the problem, that's one of them. And it's not to be, I don't think it's appropriate to do it by anecdotal or even personal opinion. I think that there's a scientific method for evaluating that, and we have experts qualified to do it, and that's one of the things that should be on our list.
There may be other comments which you want to go to, but I'd like you to think about, well, is there some sort of protocol that you want to agree to or discuss further here? Rick, you look like you're about to say something.
Well, yeah, I'm still unclear as to what guidance, you all want to give about communication with the committee.
I guess what I'm asking and I'm concerned about is, are we as a committee, are we going to communicate with each other through Mike and start, putting together information and sending it to Mike, to him to distribute to the committee prior to meetings, that sort of thing going on?
So the question is, are we going to, at least Rick has started to do that, and that's what's raised this. But let's see if there are any, if we shouldn't be doing that, then we should decide that we shouldn't be doing that, and a reason and whatever. So David, go ahead.
Well, I sort of disagree with your premise. In the sense that in our charter, when we had the discussion in our charter about communications with the public, we encouraged members to communicate with the public, to communicate their experiences, to be clear that they were only speaking for themselves. And even when dealing with their positions they advocate, just to be clear about what it was they were doing. So I don't think that there's a particular problem with Rick if he wants to correspond with Bill, as long as he's clear about the things that we as a group have decided are the limitations of our communications with members of the public, which is what Bill is vis-a-vis this committee. Beyond that, to me, there's a different substantive issue about how we as a team approach the science of what we're doing.
Thank you, David. Does anyone? Yes, Mike, go ahead. And then Rick, do you want to?
After we're done with
Okay, sure. Go ahead, Mike.
Well, I tend to agree with what David said in the sense that I don't think we should stop people from even being able to advocate if they want for something. I do think that each of us, it would be helpful to this group, and so far this is what I think has generally gone on, and I don't exclude Rick's comment from it, to sort of avoid staking out positions early. We're trying to build a consensus here. The important thing early in the process is to be open to all kinds of things. It would not be productive, for example, for me to now, send all of you a defense of desal, or to argue, when someone in the public or somebody else makes a comment about desal that I think is not accurate, to get right on it, because I don't want anybody having a misimpression about that issue, because it makes it sound like I'm not letting go of desal and I'm not willing to be part of this process of basically starting from scratch to look at the problem and figure out where we're going next. So in that sense, I feel like, but I don't want to be censored. If I feel like somebody said something about desal that is just really wrong and outrageous and ridiculous, I should be able to correct, say, this is only my opinion, but this is what I think. But I'm going to censor myself from defending desal. That's not helpful to this group. We want to be getting much clearer about what's the gap, what are our needs, what are the process, how much water do we need? I mean, that's a first question before you start to think about which alternatives are better or make more sense. So I think it's more like self-regulation rather than we're not going to let people make these comments or not be allowed to or something. I would tend to stay off of attacking somebody's particular solution or alternative or promoting it strongly right now at the beginning. The public can do that. Some people right now know that they think they have the right answer for what we need and they have the right to tell us what that is. I think as members of this committee, we want to be much more open to the process of scientific endeavor and so forth, and and I didn't think Rick's comment really violated that. He was trying to say, I understand something about this information we got, I want to clarify something about it, and I have additional information that might be helpful to think about it. As long as he says, that's my opinion, it's not, I'm not speaking for the committee, I don't represent myself to be the expert on this question. I think that's okay. I'll end on this point. I think people need to self-regulate and not be quickly jumping on and defending positions about where we ought to end up at this point. It's not helpful to us as a group.
Thanks, Mike. Do you want to? Charlie, did you want to go next? Go
Yeah,
ahead.
I just want to comment from my own experience. The reaction I first had to the discussion about using this drought, this rationing experience as an example of the minimal economic impact to the city, which is what I think you stated to the business community, that it seemed as if the impacts were minimal from where we are in rationing. And my experience as a business person is entirely different. And my first reaction was, I'm going to respond to this. And then I thought about it. I said, well, we're going to start this serial meeting through emails. Do I email Rick? Do I email Mike? Do I email Bill? With my experience about the economic impact of rationing on my business and my industry. And I think we just have to be careful about making claims or offering opinions that might be misconstrued as fact, because it's going to solicit a response from somebody at some point, and then we get into the whole serial meeting. If I respond to Rick's commentary through the same forum, does that then have to be distributed to the rest of the committee, and are we then having this serial meeting outside of the meeting itself? So I think we just really need to be careful. It's a very slippery slope, and be careful not to express opinions as fact or to suggest that a single incident taken out of context is an example pro or con of any position.
Thank you, Charlie. So there are about three concerns, I think. One is the business of making sure that if you do write in this way, you make it clear that you're representing yourself. Another is what Charlie just mentioned, which is the danger of creeping into a serial meeting. And the third was what Mike mentioned, which was the business about really this is a collaborative group. You want to be careful sort of how you throw yourself around in this context, because it sort of changes the way that the dynamic works in the group. But Rick, go ahead. Perhaps this is the last word. I don't know. See how it goes.
Well, I share the concern about having a serial meeting, and of course I'm trying in my communication to be fair, but I think this is the place to have the meeting and the discussion. So, for example, if somebody finds something, in my letter that they want to take issue with, I would really welcome that. I've gone for several years without getting that kind of feedback from people. There hasn't been conversations. People are in their own silos and they don't converse, with a few notable exceptions like Mike, who always got together with me whenever I asked. So that I think would be the remedy for having, for dealing with opinion or something that we disagree with. I have one more communication that went out to a few of you. I think it went to Mike and Sue, who were part of that conference call. Oh, and Dana, you were on that conference call too. And so I thought I'd just share it with everybody else, just in the spirit of, so everybody gets to see the same communication, because after that conference call, I did send an email out, and it has to do with the graph that was, the chart that was printed in the Urban Water Management Plan of 2005 that had the city using the maximum amount of Loch Lomond even in normal years, and what that does to our drought years. So I'll share that with you now.
Yeah.
I want to put a little context around the graph that Rick is sending around, and I want to direct your attention to the graphs that are in the presentation from yesterday, particularly those that are on, what is this, these page numbers. So starting on page 25 and 26 and 27 give a sort of a breakout. I think that what you can see here is the actual way the city has used Loch Lomond, regardless of what was in the 2005 Water Management Plan, and it doesn't reflect the strategy of using it fully every year. So that's, whatever that says and wherever it came from, that's not actually what we do. That's the point I want to make.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that. I'm aware of that, and actually my request would be just to have our assumptions that go into, you know, what our supply is going to be in that second drought year reflect actual practice rather than theoretical maximum of.
Well, again, I'm assuming that was overtaken by events from the 2010 Water Management Plan, but I don't know the details of that plan.
You know, what,
I don't know if that's the case.
I'm looking for guidance from you about this, but it seems to me that the conversation about this kind of data issue may not be appropriate on this agenda. David. But I want to wrap up what we began at the beginning of this conversation.
Yeah,
Go ahead, David.
I mean, first of all, Rick's correspondence was not correspondence to the committee or a response by it. I mean, the correspondence from Bill was correspondence to the committee. And so, to the extent that Rick chose to share his response, that I don't know that, you know, it's a different animal than what we set protocols for in dealing in what Mike is dealing with, which is correspondence to the committee and how we respond to it as a committee.
Yeah, what Rick is describing
but the other question is that whether it comes in correspondence from the public or in something from one of the members, the question is whether we agendize the topic and when, and in the context of what other discussion. The notion that we have something come up in these emails and that we get sidetracked into a substantive discussion about it without context and without staff support, evaluation, and data, I think is a big waste of our time.
Thank you, David. Mark, try to keep on track and try to get us back to wrapping up the topic that was raised at the beginning about protocols and behavior around this correspondence. But speak, Mark. Go ahead.
My sense of what's happening here is that we're spending an inordinate amount of time discussing something for which there's no basis, and I have a problem with that, and I think that's we have plenty of work to do, and there will be time in our process going forward for substantive discussions and sharing of viewpoints and such, and I think we ought to get on with that and not spend any more time on this. And I think in that context, I would share Mike's opinion and others that, you know, it's just not the right time for this. And we don't want to be distracted every meeting, because, you know, every one of us could be writing letters to the committee about whatever's on our mind about water. And if we take time to discuss each of those each meeting, we'll never get anywhere. And that's my number one concern.
Thank you, Mark. Does anybody want to say more about this, or can we just stop here? Great. I think we talked it out. The next item, then that concludes that item on the agenda. And what we're going to do now is go to what we're going to start off with yesterday, but we put forward to today, which is the, if I can get to this, which is the issue of presenters and contractors. So we're running a little bit behind already, so let's get on with it. We sort of smushed together a couple of things in here. One was that long ago, about 6 weeks ago, we sent out that survey. There was a lot of interest, really, in who is going to make presentations to the committee. We sent out the survey. Some of you replied. I put a compilation together and sent it out to you in the packet, so you see what everybody said. At the same time, there is some questions about who should be subcontracted by your technical consultant, Stratus, to help with sort of specific things. The one specific thing that's coming up right away is the issue of I call it the flow model, but I don't know what is it called, the flow model? The what? The confluence model. So the confluence model, which is a kind of a key element in all of the studies that are going to go on and have gone on. And so we smushed those two together in this. As far as the list of presenters goes, one of the things that I think has turned up as especially Carrie and some of you who are working on the Gantt chart, you're recognizing that there really won't be that many opportunities for presenters or need for presenters in the next couple of months. I mean, we can put one in there if we really want it, but it's not like it's needed for the way that your work has been set up. But in any case, what I wanted to get out of this session, this part of the meeting, is an agreement on any presenters that you want for next month, for July, for your meetings at the end of July, if indeed you want any. An agreement on who to use for the confluence model. If it's not FISC, who's it going to be? And then an agreement on any instructions that you need to give to Stratus about those agreements. That's where I think we need to go with this part of the meeting. One other thing about the confluence model and FISC is that we've sort of danced around this, but if you were to say, oh, okay, FISC is the only guy who knows how to do this, let's do FISC, and we went ahead with FISC, I'm afraid that FISC would sort of go on in this project with you with a kind of a cloud over his head, because some of you have said, we're not so keen on FISC for one reason or another, and those of you who may not feel the same way have said nothing. And so he'll go ahead and his work will become part of the record and part of your, just a second, and part of everything that you do with this kind of, so I want to make sure that we get an opportunity to say if you think he really is that bad or if he's better than that, because he needs to be characterized appropriately, I think. David.
Yeah. Would somebody explain what confluence modeling is and why we need it?
I'm pointing at Rosemary. I'm guessing you're the right person.
Yeah. So I want to turn your attention to slide 48 in yesterday's presentation. And slide 48? Yeah.
Supply modeling.
Supply modeling. What the supply model does, and in this particular situation, we have a proprietary piece of software that actually does our supply modeling. That proprietary piece of software is called Confluence. But what it does is it takes the inputs that have been described here, hydrology, operating rule curves, system demand by customer class, water rights constraints, et cetera, and it generates a forecast of available supply under different hydrological conditions. So the slides you saw later in the presentation when we talked about fish flows used current demand all the characteristics of current demand, 1977 hydrology, and current operating rule curves as they would, normal operating rule curves. Those were the products of that supply modeling. That's what it does, and that's helps us to understand on the supply side how different hydrology and potentially climatological conditions will affect available water supply for us.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Dana probably knows something more about this.
Well, yeah, I mean, it appears to be kind of in a similar vein as the calcium-2 model on a smaller scale. Okay. So, okay, well, that's fine. I mean, so I'm just wondering to what extent, if any, it's tied to a hydraulic model of the system, distribution system?
No.
It's not. It's just a supply side thing?
Yes.
Okay.
So we've sort of gone into the confluence model question, so let's stick with that. Oh.
I didn't hear the question.
Well, Dana's question asked was, to what degree is the confluence model modeling for us, in addition to the supply side, the distribution system? And my understanding, and Heidi, please correct me if I'm wrong about this, is that it does not model the distribution system, it's only modeling the supply inputs.
I don't actually see Heidi. She's some of that. No, she just stepped out. So, does that take care of it, Dave?
Just a little follow-up. When it's evaluating the supply under different hydrologic conditions, does that include the supply that is generated through more conservation?
No.
Thank you. Rick, what we'd like to do is start this consideration of who you need to look after the confluence model, and then how you're going to get it. So, but you wanted to talk about something else, or
No.
Okay, go for it.
Yeah. Well, as I understand it, I don't know, maybe Dana knows other people who could do this, but it sounds like Gary Fisk is the only game in town as far as, being able to model the system.
That's kind of halfway a question, I think. Is he the only game?
The confluence model is Gary's model. He's created its proprietary software. As far as I know, no one else runs it, or at least if they run it as a utility person inside of utility for their system.
But it sounds like it's the only kind of model. It's the only model of its kind.
Oh no, I don't think that's right. But to create a new model and to calibrate it and to get it all tuned in is a very labor-intensive activity and time-consuming. So it's not as though we could decide, let's switch horses now and have a result that we would feel comfortable and confident with in a reasonable time frame. That's my experience for many years, both on groundwater models and surface water models.
I don't have any problem with going ahead with Gary Fisk. I mean, the objections that people might have heard early on when this, a technical consultant was being proposed before we had a chance to meet was that it included a lot of the same players that led us to desalination, including Kennedy Jenks, Gary Fisk. But I don't have any problem with his expertise, and I think that our committee is we're going to be asking the right questions, so I don't have any problem with it.
Right. So we may be at a point where we could actually. Oh, Dana, you wanted to say something? Go ahead.
Well, I just wanted to follow up on one point. And the reason I brought up the connection between the hydraulic modeling of the distribution system and the supply side modeling of hydrology is that, when we're doing water supply planning, we're looking at these gross pictures of what water supplies are available and, when. And, just because there's all this water available doesn't mean that we can actually use it in real-time operations. And so I would recommend to the group that when we're looking at this modeling, we also ask, for information from the city to say, hey, does this work operationally? Can we move this water when we want it, when it's there, to where it needs to be?
Thank you, Dana. Are we at a place where we can actually reach agreement on this? So if I said, are there any objections to using Gary Fisk for the purposes of the confluence model? There is no objection, so we've got a consensus on that. The next thing is, how do we get him? I'm assuming that he would be a subcontractor to Stratus. It's your job to tell Stratus what they should do, or to recommend to Rosemary, I guess, to tell Stratus what they should do. So would you agree to ask Rosemary to tell Stratus to subcontract with Gary Fisk? No objections to that. Great. Then now let's go back to the item at the beginning, which was the question of presenters. Go ahead, Peter.
Just a technical question. Why can't the city employ him directly, contract him directly? Why does it have to go through another entity? Is there any reason for that? Or because you always save some money if you eliminate middlemen, right?
So we do have him already on contract for other specific work, and I think the intent was for work that was related to this, he would be part of the Stratus team. And in a lot of ways, as having that relationship between Bob and Gary is actually a value to help direct the work so that it works with what Bob is doing as well. So I think that, yeah, there may be a little markup. I can't remember if this contract has a subcontractor markup or not, but I think it's actually a good thing to team those folks. And while I have the microphone and moving on, could I just say one other thing? So I just want to point to this, the list of the presenters. Yeah, and I just want to say that for everybody except for the two people, Sarah Feekins and Heather Cooley on the list associated with what I provided, you can eliminate those all because all that rest of that got integrated into here. So just the two climate change people remain on this list for us.
Thank you for the clarification. Okay, so the list got a lot shorter, but no less powerful. So the question is now, looking at the next few months, really looking at next month, July, do you want to have a presentation from somebody as part of your July agenda? And if so, who would you like? Does anybody have any feelings about that? Do you want to have a presenter, somebody, a subject matter presentation at your meeting next month?
Would it make sense to ask that question when we're doing the July agenda?
We could do that, yeah. So,
Yes,
so we should just put this off until then.
Well,
Go ahead, Rick.
I can see a value for deciding now. I'm thinking it would make sense to hear from John Ricker, who, as you know, is the County Water Resources Director, who's been at that same job since the 70s, and who knows, the watershed. He knows the system. He's convened the working group of the neighboring water agencies to discuss water transfers. He's the one person in the county that knows the most about water rights on San Vicente Creek. He knows all the studies that the city has done over the years. I would like to see Ricker and Terry Tompkins from the City Water Department share the time with us, because they could really just give us a grounding of what's been looked at in the past, what are our prospects now.
Ricker and Tompkins is your suggestion. There are two things here. One is who, and the other is when. We're talking about July, but others have said, well, why don't we wait until we talk about the July agenda, which is going to come up at the end of the afternoon. We have about half an hour for the July and August agenda. Would you like to talk further about the people you might add to this sort of to the list that you want to have, or do you want to go straight on now and then talk about including Ricker and Tompkins in July? Yes, David.
I would prefer that we talk about what we're doing in July when we talk about the whole agenda. The other thing that I would just be mindful of is that we've already talked about the fact that we wanted Rauscher through Stratus to orchestrate some of how we would get our presentations other than the alt fair. And I would like him to have an opportunity to have that input and organize things for us. I would also bring to people's attention, if you aren't aware of it, that a whole lot of what Ricker presented to the Water Commission is what wound up in the county grand jury report. You know, that he was probably their single biggest resource. So if you really want to hear what he has to say, I would read that pretty thoroughly.
Thank you. Let's see. We've got objection to actually dealing with this, with the consideration of Ricker and Tompkins now, but we want to do it later in this session. Does anybody object to that? Okay, then we've got Ricker and Tompkins noted, and we'll bring this up again when we talk about July and August, which will be at the end of the, later in the session. Yes, Mike?
I would just say when we talk about that later in our meeting, we should start with the question of what kinds of presentations we want before we start saying this person and that person. I'm not going to have the discussion now, but I think that's the way that's the way we should lead into that part of the discussion.
Okay.
And why these two versus others.
Yeah. Thank you, Mike. Okay, then let's thank you very much for your agreements on this item. We did some important stuff. Next up is a discussion about scenarios.
Thanks. What, you think yesterday's on water wasn't substantive enough? Hi, everybody. So it's really unusual for me in my career, in the career I chose and wanted, to present. Usually I facilitate. I presented yesterday, I'm going to present today. I would hope this would be the last time, because you'll have Rauscher on and the other people. But if I had to present about something, multi-criteria, obviously yesterday, I'm fascinated by that, and scenarios are incredibly interesting topic. So yesterday you did the exercise, really one of the most difficult things is to separate what's an alternative for this problem and what's the actual goal. And the goal you can think of as the difference between what would happen if you didn't engage in any strategies and what you want the world to be. Well, one of the reasons that you chose the recon and then real deal process, which for members of the public who may not have followed this, means simply that the committee is going to run through their decision process very quickly without worrying too much about exactitude. And then they're going to assess the areas that need more research and work, and then go through the decision process in the real deal once again. So you're in recon, you still have to wrap your arms around a goal. And this is the way I had originally thought about it. When I had gotten hired on this job and I just had my first impressions, and even through the interviews, I thought, so here's all that decision model part with the criteria and the alternatives, and over here is your goal. And I figured that during recon, you would have a goal that was basically all about gallons, right? How many gallons of water do you need to find in the couch or make or reduce demand for? And so my concept was that you would, during recon, pick a number and agree on a huge error bar and not worry too much about it. And then, because of the way that you had streamlined and identified and focused your research, by the time you got to the real deal, maybe you could scooch this a little bit smaller, right? But this is all in terms of gallons. One of the things that should be clear from Rosemary's presentation and a lot of Rick's comments is that it isn't just gallons, it's the distribution of the precipitation throughout the year. So now you have two issues. Like if you could get rid of peak demand, you might have much less of a problem. So it's not just gallons, it's the gallons throughout the year. And the other thing is, you don't know with climate change what the distribution will be, and you could end up with fewer drops of rain, but you could also get them coming at times that create more problems or less problems for you. So when you put the uncertainty around both of these, that's a lot of uncertainty. So that's tough. But as I abided with you all and listened to you and read the materials, what I realized is that there's a third dimension of this, which is the values piece. So these two pieces, gallons and distribution, are about the ability for a modeler to look to the future and just accurately tell you how short you're going to be on gallons. And if you're going to be really short, then you want this kind of alternatives. And if you're only going to be a little bit short, then you're going to lean towards a different suite of alternatives. That's pretty simple, right? But what I believe about you as a committee is that you're not actually sure how much you ought to close the gap. So for some people, your future vision of Santa Cruz is one that has a relatively small gap. So in a very bad drought year, in August, you would have some curtailment, if I'm using that word right. It's not that you always want everyone to be able to take a 20-minute shower, right? But there would be somewhere in this spectrum from excess to abundance to disaster to belt tightening, and there's some word in here that's escaping me at the moment, that some of you would be thinking, this is what you're shooting for the Santa Cruz that you envision. And some of you would be thinking, no, actually, we want this one. Or somewhere in that spectrum. Any thoughts? This is important.
Well, you're correct. Your observation. I thought your observation's correct, and there are, I'm sure, great differences, and we could start that discussion whenever you're ready to have it. Is that now?
Oh, that will be a really rich discussion. Actually, in a way, I want to, this is strange for me because I love those kinds of discussions, but in a way, what I want to do is suggest that you put it off till the real deal. And the way that would work is, but that's a lot of putting off I'm suggesting. One is, you would, there's so much uncertainty in the simple things, even as how many gallons of water are you going to need, or how many drops of water are you going to be missing, that instead of picking one point with these massive error bars, which end up being almost meaningless, that you take an extreme point in the decision space of gallonage, and you run your model against both of these possibilities. So you say, I can't really predict what's going to happen with climate change, but so rather than try to just pick the piece that rolled into the middle, I'm going to pick two quite different ones and run the model against both. And you would do something similar, for instance, with not only climate change, but with fish flows. So you would take the pieces that pack into your how many gallons do we usually really need, and instead of picking one point with an error bar, you would pick two relatively extreme points.
And this was described earlier as picking ranges rather than numbers, am I correct?
No, because here you would pick one number with a range, and here you're picking two possible numbers, and each one of them could have a range.
I see. Thank you.
So for the sort of scientific pieces, I think this is a complex thing to talk about, especially when you add in that you have to look at distribution too. And what that would allow you to do if you chose to use these scenarios for recon is it would allow you to look through Rosemary's presentation and say, we really want Rauscher to start studying this stuff because we think it's going to help us narrow down where we are. And maybe then we could use one goal with a range by the time we get to the real deal. So this is one thing that I described in those emails that I sent around, is the possibility that you would defer trying to agree on one point by using scenarios. And you would deliberately pick extremes. And then the other piece that I'm throwing out for discussion is the idea that instead of trying to agree on how many gallons, what kind of gap the city vision requires, that you would say, well, let's consider two possible types of cities, and let's look at what the decision model would do for us. So that's pretty complicated stuff. And one of the things that David tends to like to ask is, well, you're asking us to do this, what are the alternatives?
But I wouldn't need to ask it if that's the analysis we're doing.
I don't understand.
Well, if we've decided, what you're
Closer
really,
to the mic, Dave.
yeah, what you're really talking about here is that we look at the range of alternatives from supply and how they would impact the range of results on the community under a variety of scenarios, which could be extreme climate change, moderate climate change, drought scenarios, heavy rainfall mixed into only 2 months in the winter instead of 4. I mean, there's a whole variety there. Right. And broadening the base of how we look at the two ends of that so that we can start to see how alternatives might play out is really, that's a model and a discussion we probably need to have, and it's easier for us if we look at a range than if we look at only specifics at the beginning, because I don't think we're in a position to agree upon specifics, whether it be in supply or our vision for the community and what the community can live with.
Oh, Mark, go ahead.
In thinking about the graphic illustration you have up there, what I'm thinking about in response to that is there are so many other factors that are not on that piece of paper up there, not the least of which include a resiliency issue, like how resilient is our water system going to be under different scenarios, what our future demands might be and how they might be affected, what sort of economic impacts will result from different scenarios of supply and demand, what sort of quality of life will our city have in terms of its residents? Is it okay if we no longer have lawns? I mean, that might be something that we want to consider. And I'm just, that's just sort of my gut level reaction to this, that there are so many, how much energy are we using in our water supply distribution system? I was quite surprised to hear on the tour of the water system that the electric bill for the current system is about $1.6 million a year. I don't know how much carbon that represents, but we have a climate action plan that's relevant and been adopted by the city. And how does that affect our climate action plan goals? And so I guess in a sense I'm sort of unprepared to have a meaningful discussion about all of these, that graphic. It's for me not complete enough, and I'm not quite sure how to make it complete, but I think it needs to be complete in order for us to understand the choices we have and the options that are before us.
You're absolutely right. And part of the way people think about scenarios is very technical and scientific, and part of it is that it's about being able to tell a story that's compelling for other people. And if it's missing too many of the important pieces, that's not a good story. Remember yesterday's exercise when we were doing the two-dimensional, three-dimensional thing? So we had the goals and the scenarios over to the left, and we had the criteria and the sub-criteria, and then we had the alternatives. So of the list that you said, I would say half of them were criteria. So everything on your list was uncertainties. And if you look at that whole map that we did yesterday, there were uncertainties in every single thing. Uncertainty about what the goal really is, what's the gap, and what's the desire. Those are both uncertain. Uncertainty about what you care to measure. For instance, do you care to measure economic impact to the possibility of having your grandchildren live in the same town as you? Is that a criterion or is that not a criterion? You have uncertainty about how to rate the alternatives. How do you measure whether a certain alternative accomplishes things? So your list was of uncertainties, and I would say about half of them were criteria and half of them were complications to how do we even define our goal. So can you remember your list? Because it was a good one.
It's internal and needs work, but yes.
All right, so let's talk about some of those, because I think this is a worthwhile discussion. For instance, and ask the question, is it about how the heck do I identify even what my problem is, or is it about how am I going to measure things? So pick one.
Well, I would say both are on the table for me. How do
Right.
I define the problem? And also, how do what factors do I need to consider as I define the problem? And so the first thing I mentioned was resilience. So I'm happy to talk about that. As I think about our water system, and in light of the tour that I was on, I realized that pretty much all of our water comes from the river. And I actually don't know the exact numbers, but I think some of the graphics that Rosemary presented yesterday, the biggest part of the supply is always the river. And I'm wondering if that's a smart strategy for us as a community to put sort of all of our eggs in one basket. And wouldn't it be smart for us to have some other ways of providing water when we need to? And so, to me, that's an important criteria, that resilience is part of the solution.
I did this crazy placement on purpose because you have the criteria that the council started you with, and they're not etched in stone. Haha, get it? So I am now adding other criteria as they come. You're going to move it to a better spot?
Just out of the way.
Oh, excellent. So this is an issue about criteria. Now, name me one that is more likely to be about the goal off of your list.
Future demand?
Exactly.
Would that be a goal?
That's part of the problem. Well, it's funny, 'cause I think this is the most subtle and difficult one. Future demand, if you think of it as how demand will change willy-nilly, goes here because it changes the gap. But future demand, if you think of it as a lever that you can manipulate, is an alternative. So this one is just, that's the mind bender. But it belongs in both places, and the distinction is this is the one that is kind of like the weather, that it's going to happen. And this is the one that you're trying to turn the lever. Anybody have any other puzzlers?
Are we going back to puzzlers?
So as we turn the lever, it moves from left to the right, correct? It's not equally weighted on both sides. Is that, to make that clear, the future demand? We can either take it as given and then tailor our system around it, or we can use it as part of the alternatives where we can manipulate the future demand and shape it in a way or build mechanisms into the future demand that kind of satisfy our supply goals.
Exactly. And to the extent you want to accurately feel what your gap is, you would want to identify your gap in terms of what's going to happen willy-nilly. And you don't want to overestimate what the gap is. If you think demand's going to drop on its own, then you want to express the gap as being relatively small. But you might want to then make it smaller yet by manipulating it. If you think that demand is going to stay flat or even increase, then you're going to expect that there's a bigger problem and a bigger gap. So that's why it belongs on both sides. I'd like to stick with the puzzle. I'd like to stick with this puzzle thing a little bit longer because I think it's worthwhile.
Can I just add something? One of the things that I find interesting about this subject is that, for me, I need to understand the factors that go into each of these things. So one of the things I mentioned earlier was what sort of quality of life might we have? And that one seems like, it's kind of like when the city announces, or we find ourselves facing a 15% curtailment or 20, pick a number, it doesn't matter. I have no idea what 25% curtailment means. I do not know what that means for me as an individual living in this community, for me as a business owner in this community, for my, great aunt who's in a, convalescent home. I don't know what that means. And so, what kind of, and I don't know how to do that. I don't know how to understand other than it's 25% less water. I can understand that, but does that mean I have a 3-minute shower or 2-minute shower? Does that mean a shower once a week, once a month? Can I no longer grow vegetables in my garden? I mean, that's the kind of, I guess, qualitative things that I struggle with in understanding the impact of these percent reductions and millions of gallons. And I just wonder if there's a way for us to make it real.
May I just add on to this? I mean, I think it goes into the numbers we've gotten already, but just drill one level deeper. Like we know how much a household or how much the average person uses, like 97 gallons, right? Thank you for the numbers. Right? So now, if you can find out how this is divided up between toilet, shower, and dishwashing and garden, and so, and then we have this is the basis then for. Then we can say 25% off. Do you want to take it off the shower, or is that kind of what would fill in that gap?
And I would add, I tried doing some work on this before. I don't think I got it right, so I'm not going to insist that I knew what I was doing about it. But when you try and communicate to people, what would what would be the impact if we had a drought like 77, et cetera? You tell people, well, right now people use an average of X amount of water per household, per person in the house. And I would say the almost universal response is, well, geez, that's an awful lot of water. And then you find out that those people are using way more than that themselves. The person you're talking to uses more than the average, and they don't realize how much water it takes to have a shower for 5 minutes, even with a low flow shower head, whatever. They don't really understand, given their practice, how they wash dishes or what they're doing in their house, or if you water house plants. When you're not in a drought and you're not used to it, you walk around and you water stuff till it's watered. And then, at my house, we got a little meter and we're going around and doing that now. So I now know what it takes on a typical week to water all the houses and the plants in the house. I'm still having plants die and I haven't got it right in the yard, but I'm working on it. But I think that's something that is important to understand, and I think you can break that sort of stuff down. And the point is, most people are, and myself included, pretty ignorant about what that average amount of water in their house means. Because again, it's universal. I've never found anybody that didn't say, and we're in the 7% most saving cities for water in the state. You say, this is how much we get per person. And its universal response is, wow, that's an awful lot of water. I could get along on a lot less than that. And then you tell them to go, bring me your water bill, which I've done in about 10 cases. Bring me your water bill. You're using way more than that at your house. I am? It's shocking to people. So part of our exercise might be, and the city staff can help us with this, because we do have some idea of, with our shower heads, the shower running for 5 minutes, we know how much water that uses. We know how much water a 1.6 gallon flush uses and so forth. But we need to get ourselves kind of steeped in that. And then you ask the question, well, how much do you use inside and how much do you use outside? So if you're asked to curtail 15% or 25% at your house or whatever it is, you start to think, well, where would I find that 25%? And you start to play, that's scenarios, that individual scenarios. So I think that's a very important exercise. When you get to the question of what is quality of life, or what's our goal, or what kind of community do we want to live in, I'll just give one example to make the point clear. I don't think we want to live in a community where most of the time you don't get to flush the toilet. That's happening in my house right now. We're not flushing pee. It's not urine. It's not being flushed down. starts to, it's bad enough that it now smells. I've never had a urine smell in my house. It smells, and so every so often we flush the toilet, even though there's only urine in it, because it's not a quality of life for me to have a smell in the bathroom and throughout more of the house now. So we need some discussion of that kind of stuff to understand in our goals and our vision of what we want to be about. I don't think every 10 years you went through a period of 2 months where you couldn't flush urine down. I think we'd all live through it, but every 3 years, every 4 years, we're going to go through this where you don't get to flush the toilet. That would be my view. Other people would say, no, you should live with it. Find a way to make it work. So we need that discussion on some level. And certainly, we could discuss lawns, and that's a debatable question. But you don't want to have a discussion about whether in Santa Cruz you can't have any outdoor gardens. That's dead on arrival, you know.
Rosemary wanted to say something.
Well, she can go after Sarah.
There is information, but it's not at the level, and it's not. And I think the point that Mark made about making it real is, you know, these are a bunch of facts and figures, but most people don't have these facts and figures in their head, and they're not sort of thinking about this and really understanding what it means to them if you say this percent or that percent.
I would concur with that. In discussions, people, you know, it's abstract. But I kind of want to go back to the beginning of this discussion, because we're getting, I think, a little bit into the specifics of it, and kind of more to that first page. I think, Carrie, what you were asking us, kind of an extrapolation from how we're going to move forward with how we create our scenarios, is part of this question. Like, how comfortable are we as a committee dealing with, in this recon phase, that the scenarios we're building have a built-in large uncertainty, and that we're kind of going into this, and instead of getting into each of those specifics, we're taking the broader view of this and kind of getting to, can we get to a range, which I know you don't like that word, but you have your upper scenario and your lower scenario, and then working in from there. So I guess that's kind of my question. Do we want to start out with the specifics and move forward, or do we want to start out with this big gap and move inwards? And is that what you were discussing, Carrie, with the two kind of assumption?
And when Mark gave such an opportunity to move into storytelling, which is also part of it, I couldn't resist. Thanks, though, for bringing us back. So, yes, so let's stick with the incredibly complex but relatively easier issue of the how do you measure how much, or how do you forecast how big the gap will be between the expected demand and the expected supply, leaving even out distribution. So Sarah's saying, comparing the approach of picking a number with a huge range versus picking two numbers that are deliberately somewhat extreme, each of which have a little bracket around them. Or I don't know if you even bother with the brackets when you're doing scenarios.
Yes, they all have brackets.
So what Mark had said is, before I can answer that question, I need to understand more of the different pieces, because there would be, I think when you're doing scenarios, you probably want to apply the 80% rule, the big things, the little bits and pieces you just forget about for recon. But there's a lot of elements inside that 80%. Still, here's the question. In dealing with the massive uncertainty that you have just around how many gallons of gap there will be, do you have any impressions, not asking for a decision, but impressions about the idea of picking these wide apart scenarios and running your decision model against each one of them, as opposed to trying to pick one number?
You've identified two scenarios in this case. Would it seem logical that the greater the uncertainty, the greater number of scenarios you would run to try to hone in on what is most likely?
There's two things. There's how much uncertainty there is, which is massive, and then there's the parameters. So you at least have the fish flow issue, you have the climate change issue, which shows up with different faces because and you have the distribution issue. So because of that, you would quickly have a lot of scenarios. So then you have to balance between the more scenarios you have, the less you can use it as a good communication tool, say with the council or the public. So it's simply a balancing act. And it might depend if you were to ask your consultants to say, sketch us some of these scenarios and look at 12 of them, and then you see that they sort of lump, then you might lump some of them. Did I answer your question?
More or less.
There's another word that I would like to see up there somewhere, which is risk tolerance, or it's two words, but it when you're looking at when you're looking at the element of uncertainty and how uncertainty in a variety of different areas, if they hit simultaneously, impacts on risk and what you can tolerate in risk, I think that's something we need to evaluate. And I just wanted to respond to something that Mark asked. I too found the notion of what's a 15% or 25% reduction to be really elusive in terms of how it impacts on everyday conduct and on lifestyle and enjoyment of life. As you get into more of the details of the modeling in the conservation plan, and when Bill Mattis does his presentation, it'll help to, that along with the baseline survey really helps to refine some of that, because it helps you focus on the degree to which different changes in hardware impact levels of consumption. And the biggest thing I think conceptually that I came to understand that changed my thinking about it was that the master conservation plan is built around hardware, like low flow faucets, those kinds of things, and all of the curtailment planning is based upon behavior. Okay, because and part of the idea is that the conservation plan has to leave something for us to do in a drought situation, and that's going to be the behavior, because you're going to be stuck with whatever hardware people have.
Interesting. So, how are we doing for time? I have one. Say what? We're not doing well. What time was I supposed to?
We were hoping to end this at 20 past 3.
Was that? No, but we had.
But we started about 20 minutes ago.
All right. I say that's
Okay.
good. Sarah, did you have something you wanted to say?
I know this is being annoying. So I guess really what I'm asking for, and what I would think you were getting with this, is our philosophy of our approach to this, right? Rather than the specifics we want to deal with or the criteria, it's actually how comfortable are we with having uncertainty in our scenarios. Like, a lot of us are very technical, and so we want to talk about the specifics a lot. Could we let that go in order to talk about these kind of broader scenarios that are really extreme, and we understand they're extreme, and we understand that's not the actual numbers we'd be dealing with in the end? Can we get to that point, or should we go with the more technical information in the beginning, because that's really what we want to talk about? I mean, I'm kind of talking to everybody in the committee. Personally, how comfortable are you with there's other options, of course, but weighing those different approaches to how we set up our scenarios will help us in framing the discussions that go into the criteria for this first round. So, yeah, that was my comment.
So you need a microphone. It's interesting because we like to think of science as so neutral, but there's aesthetics in science as well as bias. There's aesthetics. And in some ways, I think, Sue, what you're getting at is, Sarah, I wish Sue were here. What you're getting at is, I got almost an aesthetic reaction to the idea of doing problem solving and living either way, you've got the uncertainty. Right. Sorry, fate gave it to you.
No, it's true.
But do you want to live with the uncertainty by picking a number as best you can and knowing you're going to improve on it and it'll still hold lots of irreducible uncertainty? Or do you want to deal with the uncertainty by running the scenarios on these relatively extreme things that let you explore the decision space? Would somebody like to rephrase that question in a comprehensible way?
I mean,
but once, just once.
Well, I can't imagine that we would be successful in coming to a single number as a group. And for that reason, I think it's going to be inevitable that we're going to pick two numbers. I don't know if they have to be the extreme numbers, but somewhere closer to the edges than the middle. One number in the middle, we will not agree on it. It's just not going to happen. I think we could agree that this, you don't have to go further than this in this direction, and you don't have to go further than that in that direction. That we probably are capable of, and that's enough to have a serious discussion. Then you have to have discussions about tolerance for risk and other kinds of questions, but at least you're all looking at the same picture. We're all looking at the same picture when we do that.
Could we just go around the room, starting with Dana, and you can pass, but just give your off-the-cuff feeling about this discussion and where you think it might lead, or not.
Really, I'm in agreement with Mike. This is the single most important thing that we have to wrestle with as a group, and trying to nail down a specific point at this number at this point, I think, is premature. And so we should try to look at the extremes and start there.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think starting with the bigger picture and then starting to drill down into it, from either end is the better way to get started with this and work our way through it.
I'll pass for the moment.
It is iterative. It's what we're supposed to do. So it sounds like the way to close in on it. I just hope we don't start with a net that's so wide that too many fish swim through.
And that's really something that will be interesting, whether you want to do extremes or sort of the shoulder. But
yeah, I would certainly favor the shoulder approach and the extreme approach.
And I think that if you get good consultant work, they can provide you the opportunity to say, yeah, let's do it this way.
My tendency would be to start from where we are with our baseline numbers today, because that's what we have and nothing changes. And from there, and I might have missed something, I'm not sure, but from there go out and look into what the ranges, what the different scenarios or the different uncertainties or ranges of uncertainty would produce, how they would impact the baseline number. Isn't that kind of where we are going?
Let's go back to that, because if I keep...
Okay.
I think this is highlighting exactly my question was. I am totally comfortable with actually doing both, because I've gone through that kind of logical thinking. I prefer probably the broader range to begin with. But that inherently has a lot more questions to begin with, and we as a group need to be comfortable with that, because if we're asking the same question over and over again in the beginning, we're going to spend a lot of time on that rather than addressing the bigger picture. So I'm actually comfortable with both types of setup. I think the broader range is kind of more with the iterative process and the recon works, but does that make sense? That's why I'm asking this question to begin with. Is like, if as a group only two of us like that theory, then that's not going to work as moving forward, because we're constantly asking the questions over and over again. And we want the specifics. Can we hold off on that?
Yeah.
And that's a personal choice. It has nothing, both are processes that work, so.
I'm comfortable with the direction of the conversation.
I'm also comfortable with using the two broader points, because I think we don't have anything specific to work with, really, so.
I spoke on this.
I'm reminded that this process is two phases. This is the recon phase, and we have a real deal coming. So in a sense, as I reflect on our conversation, I'm realizing how much I don't know. I don't know how much the committee doesn't know. But my hope is that as we move through the recon phase, by the time we get to the real deal, we'll have an understanding of the important factors that need to be considered and some definition of those. And so in that sense, I think would be good for us to move forward with some set of numbers. And I think what Rosemary presented yesterday, sort of a baseline, use that as a baseline, sort of as Peter suggested, and let's move forward and discover what we don't really know.
That's progress. All right, so David.
I just want to make sure that whatever numbers we pick, even at the extremes, that they're grounded in something. And that's what I would rely on our consultant and our technical staff for, so that even as we're dealing with the extremes, we're dealing with things that are within the range of reality.
Yes, absolutely. So what I want to do is turn the microphone over to Rosemary, and I actually messed up as a facilitator. I didn't want to start with Rosemary because that would sort of seem like I was, but ending with Rosemary, that's not good either. So I should have started over here. So you don't get to answer that question. But the question you could answer is the scope piece, because you need to instruct Stratus about how to help you with the scenarios. And I think you've given a lot of indication about what you want. Could you synthesize that?
So I think that what I heard was that we want to create scenarios in 2 dimensions at least, and possibly a third one, but at least 2. And the 2 dimensions are something on climate change, and that might be a scenario, for example, a changed distribution of rainfall pattern. And the other one might be the other extreme or example on that spectrum would be something like increased variability. And I don't know what exactly that means, but that is one of the things that people are talking about. So those would be the 2 dimensions on that one. Increased variability. So it's basically sort of more, even more variable than it already is. And then on the fisheries spectrum, we have a low and a high. We can tweak the high. We will run the model on what the DFG5 is. I think anyway, we can have that as a range on that scenario. And I think that some of the things that Mark and others of you have talked about, quality of life, resiliency, economics, in creating scenarios, in my experience, you can tell the person, we want you to tell us when you describe this scenario in a narrative form or a picture form or graphic form, how it affects certain things, economics, quality of life, availability of, water for irrigation, whatever you want them to be, resiliency, all those kind of, and you can have those be characterized for you based on sort of an elaboration, if you will, of what's happening in that particular quadrant of think of it as a 2x2 matrix. And then you get information back that gives you sort of a place that you can live. If I lived here, how would it feel? What would I do? What questions would I have? That's what I think you should ask your consultant to do.
How does that sound?
Sounds great.
Okay. And I would emphasize very much on the narrative side. Because even if they don't need it, which I'm hearing they would like, it's the communicating on to the public that's also important. Okay, excellent. So we will add, and this is very much the way you described this partnership, where they're going to come with something rough and you'll respond to it and then they'll refine it, and this will go on over several months. Okay, but we're not done, because you included what's the quality of life part, and I just want to make sure this is including the piece about being able to conceive of what would your life and what would your kids' lives be like, not just do you have roses or succulents, but the whole gamut of things. Okay, that's excellent. Excellent discussion. I really appreciate it. This is starting to work. And you'll like what you see. I mean, you'll disagree with it and tear it apart and put it back together, but I think it will be very satisfying. Thank you. Say what? No.
That phrase is usually used in another way.
Not just going.
No, it'll be easy.
You can actually do a lot of calculation that can give a high level of confidence in the accuracy. This much stuff will produce this much thrust, so that means this much movement, velocity.
Suggestion? Take 5. We're losing our quorum as people are going to the bathroom.
Yeah, I don't really believe in the 5.
He doesn't believe in the 5, but we do. That's why the
Please, if you want more, I have plenty. The trees are going on.